Thank you, Mark. Just a few, because that was a very good summary, I think, of both the statute as well as how we've operated. But just a few things to highlight. What we're supposed to be reviewing as DPWG is very broad. It basically, the way I would describe it, is anything that could potentially subject the city to federal securities law liability is what comes before DPWG. Because if you remember, the advice we have from the SEC is the liability is not only for official statements and the private offering documents, clearly the rating agency presentations, things like the filings made under 15C212, but the SEC had a much broader statement that anything reasonably likely to be influenced or to reach the trading markets could potentially subject the city to security liability. And we've not been able to really address that properly in the sense that clearly the official statements come through us, the private offering statements come through us, we're now finding the CAFR comes through us, the rating agency presentations. And just as a footnote on the CAFR, if you remember, originally the CAFR was not going to come to City Council. That was really a recommendation of Kroll, that as long as you're coming to the City Council for the official statement, you might as well have the CAFR approved ahead of time so that when it reaches City Council attached to a general fund offering, it's approved and cleared at that point. So a couple of things, without getting into whether they should or should not have come through DPWG, but they should have at least been asked, are things like the 5-year financial forecast that came out from the mayor's office. And there's also coming out from the mayor's office and also from the CFO's office various announcements that do, whether they reach the trading markets is clear, because some of these appear on the front page of the bond buyer. So the question is how to address that, and recognizing that we are reaching everything, to my knowledge, that the SEC has taken action against. We're reaching the official statements, rating agency presentations. And despite the SEC advice on these other points, to my knowledge, has not taken an enforcement action. But nevertheless, the purpose of the statute is to also promote the highest standards. So we want to see how we can do that. And I think one approach that could work, and we're pretty far along with this, is when there are things like budget announcements or forecast or even the CAFR going up on the website prior to coming through the audit committee and the council, as soon as it got through DPWG the last time. One approach would be to go back to the city's website. You may remember that originally Vincent Elkins was hired to create a website for the city that would have the information critical to investors on it. I think if we can establish procedures that have these other, if you will, ancillary items that potentially could subject the city to liability, if we clearly established a portion on the website called the investor information section, and what you would do is you would advise, as soon as you open the city's website, that the only information that investors should look to is on that portion. So then that would handle the situation of, if you will, political speech, various press announcements coming out, competing press releases, things of that nature. If they're not on the investor information website, or not affirmatively put on there, then I think we can go a long way to insulating the city from securities law liability for these various miscellaneous items. So that's one little cautionary note about the operation of DPWG, where we've not quite been able to implement the full statute, because the statute expressly speaks to press releases and any other item that could reach the securities markets. But I think we have a fix. Vincent Elkins was pretty far along with the website. When we came in, we made substantial revisions to it. We basically had cleared it through DPWG at that time, but then we held off because we really didn't have information that had cleared the financials. We didn't have the 03 financials, et cetera. But I think now that we're getting this body of information to come out, it makes sense to dust that off. As far as once coming back to the statute again, as Mark mentioned, there are now very clear timetables for bringing things before DPWG. They're established. We also have a calendar established. The certifications, if it's an official statement, it gets certified by both the city manager and the city attorney. And as far as any financial information in the official statement, that gets certified by the city auditor. In addition, the city auditor certifies as to the CAFR. So in addition to having the DPWG review, we have this personal certifications coming from these people in authority. So that's an overview of the statute. As far as the report that Mark mentioned, in short, I'd say DPWG is functioning extremely well. We're having everything that's critical, whether it be the 15 C212 annual filings, the private placements, the CAFRs, the materials that went to the private placement buyers, the rating agency presentations, all of this has come through DPWG. And to give you some sense of the process using the 05 financials as an example, every line, every footnote was gone over with care by DPWG to make sure it was accurate. It was a long process, and when we had the additional, it's not only the financials and the notes, it's also the letter of transmittal and what's referred to as the required supplementary information. And once the city attorney raised in his November 13th letter additional points of concern that he had with the 05 financials, and then we also had the action by the SEC against the auditor, at that point, the prudent thing was to pull back, take Note 18 off the table. That's what was done. We've been through it once again, and we've made the revisions. So I think the process worked extremely well, and I think the 05 financials reflect that. The one question we have, besides making sure we grab everything we should grab, is just to make sure this process is going to work when we're finally ready to come to market. And I think that's a big question, because taking the 05 as an example, it takes a long time to get this done. And we're going to need to get the 06 financials done. Then we're going to have a general fund official statement, all coming through DPWG. What we have done in light of the first financing expected to be, is it water, Mark, or wastewater? Is it the next financing?
It will be water.
Water.
But
we've already started on that process.
That's correct.
Knowing that it's going to take a long lead time to get the disclosure together. The other item that's mentioned in the independent consultants report as another alternative besides getting started early is to go to a shelf registration process, which basically would have the city taking, for example, your Exhibit A, your general exhibit, have that done on an annual basis, reviewed by DPWG, have it updated quarterly, and then when you're finally ready to come to market, do a supplement, a 2 or 3 page supplement. And a lot of issuers do this. In effect, you're constantly keeping your disclosure up to date so that when you do come to market, you don't have the timetables we've set forth, which can be as long as 6 months from the time you start until the time it comes to market. So to be able to take advantage of interest rates, refunding opportunities, et cetera, you may find you have to move toward this other process. Let me just come back just for a minute to our favorite topic, the 05 financials. With the letter of transmittal on Note 18 now being further looked at by Macias, if they were to make any changes that have not come through DPWG, I would recommend they come through DPWG. That between now and when we're finally ready to have them come back before the audit committee, there may be additional information that comes up, not simply through the review process, but just additional information, because as we found out, there have been these letters, there have been additional investigations going on, and from time to time it has to be looked at. So that could come up as well. The final thing is that we did reach, as the CFO mentioned, the COO mentioned, a consensus, but that consensus was with a reading into the record of the city attorney's objections that were set forth in a letter to the SEC. What was read into the record was an email from him to me, which then became the SEC letter. My caution on this is, as Mark mentioned, the purpose of DPWG is to try to reach a consensus. So I think the prudent course and the best course to defend yourself would be not to have in a record that a member of the DPWG had objections to the quality of the disclosure. It's not to say a consensus was not reached. It's to say that it's not good to have on the record the senior city official for legal advice having objections, because were there to be some problems down the road, that would be Exhibit A. And that's my summary of where we are.